Katie Graziano, host of This Is It, and today I'm going to tell you what it is. I'm going to walk you through the history of radio and television. Let's take a look.
First, let's take a look at radio. Samuel F.B. Morse invented the telegraph in 1835. In 1887, radio waves were discovered by Heinrich Hertz. Shortly after this, in 1895, Guglielmo Marconi put out and received back a radio signal using the radio or wireless telegraph. In 1899, Marconi demonstrated that his transmission was possible from far away by the transmission of a radio signal across the English Channel. Lee de Forest, deemed the father of radio, invented the Audion tube in 1906, which amplified signals which allowed for the transmission of voices over a distance via the wireless radio.
You got to think of, in terms of like modern technology, the first time that we saw the internet or something, I'm sure they had a similar reaction, kind of just amazed that the technology could allow us to do something like where you could hear someone that was talking so far away as if they were right next to you or right there with you.
The sinking of the Titanic proved the importance of the wireless radio to save people's lives. The Titanic was able to communicate with other ships in the ocean and send out an SOS signal. Today, more people can communicate and help us with safety issues.
Building off of Lee de Forest's invention, Edwin Armstrong found a way to increase the amplification of the signals gathered from the Audion tube in 1912. This is known as regeneration. Additionally, Armstrong created FM radio. Another big figure in radio was David Sarnoff. He came up with the idea of advertising to finance radio stations, as well as the idea to create a radio music box. KDKA in Pittsburgh is acknowledged as being the first station to offer regularly scheduled broadcasting. The first licensed radio station was WBZ, located in Springfield, Massachusetts. The first radio commercial was aired on August 28, 1922, and radios were first available in automobiles in 1927. As for the television, wire photo or facsimile experiments were taking place during the growth of radio. In 1923, John Logie Bard worked on a mechanical scanning system that sent a silhouette television image by wire in Britain. Charles Francis Jenkins sent a picture of President Harding to Philadelphia from Washington by wireless using a mechanical system that he created at AT&T around the same time. Vladimir Zworykin demonstrated what was the start of a partially electronic television system. Bard showed the first television pictures in 1926 in London. Kodak made the first 16mm movie film in 1927. The first demonstration of television in the United States to the public was on April 7, 1927. Hoover, the Secretary of Commerce, was televised from D.C. to New York.
It's just cool how things have progressed since then. And how now we have news broadcasts being sent across vast different distances. I mean, across oceans, across everything. And it's not just, it's not just from the nearby that you have to actually go and see. It's through television. You can go and you can just sit at home and see it. And you also have technology. It's broadcast online. It's broadcast at various different venues, and it was pretty exciting.
Additionally, in 1927, Philo T. Farnsworth, or the father of American television, patented the dissector tube. The Queen's Messenger aired on September 11, 1928, as the first televised drama. Also in 1928, a television signal was sent across the Atlantic by Bard. That same year, color television was demonstrated for the first time. The public was introduced to the television officially in 1939 at the New York World's Fair. Now let's take a look at what students and teachers think was the most significant event in broadcast history, and how it has influenced how broadcast is today. First, let's take a look at the 1930s.
I think that the fireside chats definitely affected how the presidents have interacted with the American people. For example, the White House has a Twitter. The president has the YouTube channel where he goes on and addresses the American people, the State of the Union address, and definitely you can see how broadcasting has influenced politics throughout the years.
Now let's look at the 1940s.
I feel that the most important event was the attack on Pearl Harbor. The ability for broadcasting to simultaneously tell the entire country via TV, via radio, that it had happened shows that we were able to do it, and that it also reflects later on, even in today when we had 9/11, the ability for us to tell the entire nation that something had happened, to make everybody aware at such a quick speed.
Let's hear what one teacher has to say on the 1950s.
You'd have to at least include in that group the Army McCarthy hearings, and I am old enough just to barely remember that they were on TV because I was disappointed that cartoons had been taken off the air. And I would watch my mother sit there just thoroughly engrossed in those hearings, and I would wonder why in the world life had gotten so dull that we were watching all these grown-ups sit around a room and just talk to each other. But later I was privileged to be a student of one of the producers of those Army McCarthy hearings. That was Fred Friendly. And a couple of things I remember from that class, he talked about the way the camera could bring to people some kinds of truth that were not, you couldn't really put into a script in a way, on the radio, say. I think the Army McCarthy hearings just gave us an idea of what television potentially could do to show us things that were real. Granted, it's fraught with dangers. I mean, it also maybe showed us how theater can be persuasive.
Now we'll take a look at the 1960s.
I believe it was the embedding of the journalists in the Vietnam War, because every night people were able to see what was actually going on a day-to-day basis, and I believe in the long run it turned the country against the war. Now, journalists are embedded with troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it all became possible because of the Vietnam War.
Now let's look at the 1970s.
I think there was a change going on in the 70s. In the 1960s and into the 70s, there were really only 3 networks. And so the networks put TV shows on that tried to appeal to as many people as possible. Cable TV hadn't appeared yet, with the 200 channels or whatever. But you were starting to get TV shows that went after niche markets. And that's what we have today. We're moving from the old sort of generic TV shows to what we see today, where everything is highly specialized and very edgy and risky.
Now look at the 1980s.
Was the Challenger explosion. Just because I was young then, I remember it was a snow day where I was living in Connecticut, and we were outside shoveling our driveway, and my mom came outside and told us that the space shuttle had exploded. And I remember most of the rest of the afternoon and that night, wall-to-wall broadcasts, covering the disaster, what had happened to the astronauts. From what I understand, it had a big impact on fledgling news stations like CNN as well, that covered the idea of 24-hour coverage of a story like that. I think it set the tone for a lot of what was to come in the future with other events and disasters and tragedies.
Next up is the 1990s.
The broadcasting of Princess Diana having her car accident. I was actually in St. Petersburg. I was visiting a friend of mine who she was helping me pick out my wedding dress, and we were together. We were on vacation, and I remember we woke up in the morning and we were watching television, and the news was all over the place. And I remember we had gone from being so happy to being so sad, and it was one of those moments when I think I realized the overwhelming power of the media to show us how one moment that might have unified us. For instance, we all watched her, or at least I did, we all watched her get married in the 80s, and we watched her life basically end on that moment, and it sort of stopped the happiness that I was feeling at that particular time.
And now we'll take a look at the new millennium.
Well, I think the first event that would come up in everyone's mind is definitely September 11th, because that was just like a pivotal moment in all of U.S. history, not just like the decade. It's one of those moments where everyone knows where they were when they found out and remembers watching on the news. I think it definitely brings up the issue of what do you show on the news, how sensitive is the public to the news, because I mean people's families are in those towers and you're watching them crash and you're watching people jump out of towers. It was a very gruesome scene, and I feel like that it definitely help define what people should show on the news.
Now one student will discuss what she thinks the future of broadcast is.
I think the future of broadcasting is going to be a lot of stuff on the internet. Twitter is already starting to become really big, and I think it's probably just going to get bigger and expand to different news stations and everything. And before you know it, everything's going to be on Twitter, and you'll be able to access major news on the internet pretty much everywhere you go. I think also Facebook, because you can like a lot of those news shows, and then it'll show up in your news feed, things that are going on, which is also really beneficial. Things like MSN.com, the homepage already has a rolling headlines. If you log on, the homepage always has the biggest headlines in news, so I think that'll even become bigger.
Thanks for joining us on today's segment of This Is It. Please join us next week as we take a look at how social media is affecting politics. Have a great week.